By the time my son and his wife walked back through the front door of my house that Thanksgiving evening, there were two things waiting for them that they hadn't expected. The first was my attorney sitting at the dining room table with a briefcase open in front of him. The second was a police officer standing just to his right. I was sitting in my armchair in the corner, the same armchair I'd sat in for 31 years, and I watched their faces go from confidence to confusion to something I can only describe as the slow collapse of a very poorly built wall. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, to the night I heard the words that changed everything. My name is Walter. I'm 68 years old. I spent 34 years as a civil engineer for the county, and before that I put myself through school on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. I built things for a living: roads, bridges, drainage systems, things that were meant to hold weight, things that were meant to last. I thought I understood structure better than most people. I thought I could read when something was sound and when something was about to give way. I did not see my son's marriage for what it was until it was almost too late. My wife, Patricia, passed away 4 years ago this past February, pancreatic cancer. She was 61 years old, and she was the most practical, warm-hearted woman I have ever known. When she died, something in the house changed that no amount of furniture, rearranging, or fresh paint could fix. The rooms were the same. The light came through the same windows, at the same angles, but the whole place felt like a building that had lost a load-bearing wall. Still standing, not quite right. My son, my only child, was 34 at the time of his mother's passing. He and his wife had been married for 2 years. They lived 40 minutes away in a rental apartment, and they came to the funeral, and they stayed for a week afterward, and I was grateful for that. I truly was. His wife, my daughter-in-law, brought food and answered the phone and kept the house organized during those first numb days, and I thought, watching her move through Patricia's kitchen, that my son had chosen well. I should have paid more attention to who she was when she thought no one was watching. About 8 months after Patricia died, my son came to me with a proposal. He and his wife were having trouble making rent. He was between jobs. The company he worked for had downsized, and he was the last hired, so he was among the first let go. His wife worked as a dental hygienist, but her hours had been cut. They were behind on 2 months of rent, and they had no real savings. He was embarrassed to ask. I could see that. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, and he looked at his hands while he talked. The same way he used to look at his hands when he was 12 years old and had broken something he needed to confess to. I said yes before he finished explaining. Of course I said yes. He was my son. I have a 4-bedroom house on just under half an acre in a quiet neighborhood outside of Portland, Oregon. I paid it off 12 years ago. Patricia and I had planned to grow old in it, and after she was gone, I had been rattling around in the extra space with no real idea of what to do with it. Having my son under the same roof again felt, in those early months, like a reasonable answer to 2 problems at once. They moved in on a Saturday in October. My son carried boxes, and his wife directed where everything should go. I made chili that evening, and the 3 of us sat at the dining room table, and it felt almost like something. Almost like family. Almost like what I had been missing. For the first several months, things were genuinely fine. My son found a new position at a mid-sized construction firm. Entry-level project management, not what he'd had before, but solid work with room to grow. His wife picked up full-time hours again. I asked for no rent. I only asked that they contribute to groceries and take on some of the heavier yard work, which my knees had started to protest. They agreed readily. The shift was gradual. It happened the way temperature changes in a room. You don't notice it until you realize you've been cold for some time. It started with small things. My daughter-in-law began referring to the house as our home in conversations with friends on the phone. She rearranged the kitchen without asking me and moved Patricia's good china to the top shelf where it was difficult to reach, replacing it with their everyday dishes in the prime cabinet space. She repainted the guest bathroom without mentioning it to me first. And when I noticed and said something, she looked genuinely puzzled, as if it hadn't occurred to her that it might warrant a conversation. I thought you'd like the new color, she said. It was looking dated. Patricia had chosen that color. My son, for his part, said nothing. He had always been someone who sought the path of least friction. As a child, he had avoided arguments the way some people avoid puddles carefully, instinctively, without much conscious thought. I had chalked this up to temperament when he was young. I understood it differently now. His wife had strong opinions and a stronger will, and my son had learned, somewhere along the way, that it was easier to go along than to push back. I watched this and I said little. I am not a man who enjoys conflict for its own sake, and honestly, there was a part of me, I'll admit this plainly, that was lonely enough to accept discomfort rather than risk losing the company. That was my mistake. Loneliness is a poor negotiating position. The night I heard the conversation that changed everything was a Tuesday in early March, about 14 months after they had moved in. I had come home from my monthly dinner with an old colleague, a man named Frank who had retired from the county the same year I did, and who I still met for dinner on the first Tuesday of every month without fail. It was raining, a hard lateral Pacific Northwest rain, and I came in through the garage door, which opens into the hallway just off the kitchen. I didn't announce myself. I had no reason to. It was my house. My son and his wife were in the kitchen. I could hear them clearly. "He's not going to do anything about it," my daughter-in-law was saying. Her voice had a kind of flat certainty that I had noticed before, the voice she used when a decision had already been made and the conversation was just the formality of informing someone. "He's been alone too long. He needs us here, more than he wants to admit it." "I still think we should just talk to him," my son said. "Talk to him about what? Ask him to sign over the house voluntarily? He'll get defensive." A pause. I heard the refrigerator open and close. His doctor told him 6 months ago that his blood pressure is a problem. He's got that knee issue. He's not going to fight us. "Not really. You don't know that. I know him better than you think I do." Another pause. "We give it until the end of the year. Let him feel settled. Let him feel like we're a family. Then we start the conversation about long-term planning, about how much sense it makes for the house to be in both our names for estate purposes. We frame it as protecting him." She lowered her voice slightly, and what she said next landed in my chest like something dropped from a height. "By spring, this is our house. He can have the guest room for as long as he's healthy enough to stay. After that, there are very nice facilities in Beaverton." A long quiet. "You make it sound like we're being practical," she said. "That's all. His estate goes to you regardless. We're just being efficient about the timing." I stood in that hallway, in my wet coat, for what felt like a very long time. The rain hit the garage door in uneven bursts. I was aware of my own breathing. I was aware of the particular quality of the silence in that house, the way it had felt since Patricia died, the way it had felt more manageable with people in it. Even these people, even now. I did not go into the kitchen. I went upstairs to my bedroom, quietly, and I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, still in my coat, and I thought carefully about what I had just heard. Here is what I have learned about anger over 68 years of living. The first version of it is always the least useful version. The hot, immediate anger that wants to storm back into the kitchen and say something irreversible. That anger feels powerful and it accomplishes nothing. The anger that does useful work is the kind that cools into clarity, the kind that asks quietly in the dark, what is actually happening here, and what can actually be done about it. I took off my coat. I washed my face. I went to bed, and I began to plan. The first call I made was to Frank the following morning, while my son and his wife were both at work. Frank is one of the sharpest people I have ever known, and more relevantly, his younger sister had been a practicing estate attorney in Portland for over 2 decades. Her name is Margaret Osei, and Frank gave me her direct number without asking many questions, because Frank has known me for 30 years and understands that when I ask for something directly, there is a reason. I called Margaret that same afternoon. I explained my situation in broad terms. She asked precise, practical questions. By the end of the conversation, she had given me 4 pieces of information that I wrote down in a small notebook I keep in the drawer of my nightstand. First, my name alone was on the deed to the house. This was straightforward and clean. I had never added Patricia's name for tax reasons that had made sense at the time, and after she died, the thought of altering the deed had felt too much like paperwork laid over grief. but it meant that no one could contest my right to do anything I chose with the property. Second, my son had no legal claim to the house during my lifetime. None whatsoever. Whatever his wife had convinced herself of, or him, about estate planning or eventual inheritance, none of it had any bearing on present legal reality. Third, a power of attorney, which they had apparently discussed trying to obtain, would require my voluntary signature and my demonstrated mental competence, both of which I had full control over. Fourth, if I chose to sell the house, I could do so. I could do so quietly. I could negotiate a leaseback arrangement with the buyer if I needed time to make alternative arrangements, and I could do so without informing anyone in the household until the transaction was complete. Margaret said this last part carefully, because she is a careful woman. She said it was unusual. She said most people in my situation found some way to resolve things through direct conversation before taking such a step. I said I had a specific reason for not wanting to give advance notice. She didn't press me on it. She scheduled an in-person meeting for the following week. I want to be honest about something. In those first days after I heard the conversation, I considered the direct route. I considered sitting my son down and telling him exactly what I had heard, and giving him the chance to be the man I had raised him to be, rather than the man he had apparently allowed himself to become. I thought about it seriously. I lay awake thinking about it on more than one night. The problem was not that I doubted my son's ability to feel shame when confronted. The problem was that I doubted, deeply, his ability to act on that shame against the weight of his wife's will. He would feel terrible. He would apologize sincerely, and then she would work on him in the evenings, in the quiet hours when I was not present, and within 2 weeks everything would have returned to what it had been, except now they would be more careful. Now I would have shown my hand and gotten nothing in return. I was not willing to show my hand for nothing. So I did what I had done for 34 years as an engineer when I was handed a problem with a fixed set of constraints and a specific outcome requirement. I assessed the variables. I identified the steps. I worked methodically, in the correct order, without deviation. Margaret was excellent. She had recommended a real estate agent she trusted, a woman named Donna, who had been working residential property in the Portland metro area for 20 years, and who understood, when I explained the circumstances in general terms, that the process needed to be handled discreetly. No yard signs, no open houses, while the house was occupied. Private listing, pre-qualified buyers only. Showing times coordinated around my household's work schedules. I met with Donna on a Thursday morning in late March, while my son was at his office and his wife was at the dental practice where she worked. Donna walked through the house with a clipboard and a measuring tape and an expression of professional neutrality that shifted, when we reached the master bedroom, into something that looked briefly like admiration. "This is a well-maintained property," she said. "The neighborhood is strong right now. If you're serious about moving quickly, we should price it to move." I asked her what she meant by quickly. She said 60 to 90 days to a signed contract if everything went well. Closing in another 30. I said, "Let's aim for 60. She looked at me with a slight recalibration of her expression. "You're sure about this?" "I've been sure about very few things in my life with this much confidence," I said. "Yes, I'm sure." Living in the house through those weeks required a particular kind of discipline that I had not known I possessed until I needed it. My daughter-in-law continued making plans in a voice that carried through walls. She began spending weekend mornings looking at furniture on her laptop, occasionally asking my opinion about things she wanted to do to rooms that had not yet been redesigned. I gave non-committal answers. I was pleasant. I cooked dinner on the evenings I cooked dinner. I watched the evening news in my armchair. I went to bed at a reasonable hour. I also began, quietly, to move things. Not all at once. Not obviously. I went through Patricia's things, the things I had been unable to face for 4 years, with a steadiness that surprised me. I filled boxes and drove them to a storage unit I rented on the far side of town. I sorted what I wanted to keep from what I was willing to let go of. I made arrangements. I had a friend, a retired couple I had known for years, who lived in a house with a finished basement apartment they had been renting seasonally. They offered it to me at a modest rate for 6 months while I figured out my longer-term plans. I said yes. I gave them a deposit in cash. I told no one in my house any of this. Donna called me on the 43rd day. She had a buyer, a young couple, pre-qualified for a conventional loan, very motivated, flexible on timing. They had a few inspection contingencies to work through, but nothing unusual. The offer was fair, slightly above what Donna had projected as the floor. I accepted. She called again 2 weeks later with the inspection results. Minor items, none of them deal breakers. The buyers agreed to take the property as is on everything except one electrical issue in the garage, which I agreed to have remediated at my expense. Donna said the closing was scheduled for November 15th. She asked if I needed any flexibility. I said no. November 15th was fine. Then I called Margaret and told her the date, and asked her to be available on the evening of November 27th, Thanksgiving evening, specifically around 7 p.m. She asked me why Thanksgiving. I told her that my son and his wife were going to his wife's parents' home for Thanksgiving dinner. They would leave in the early afternoon and return in the evening. November 15th gave me 12 days before their return to Thanksgiving evening. 12 days to complete the move, to finalize my own arrangements, and have everything in order by the time they walked back through the door. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Walter, I want to make sure you understand that there is nothing legally required about this particular staging. You have every right to simply change the locks." "I know," I said. "This is a choice." "Yes," I said. "It is." She understood then, I think. She has seen many families in her years of practice. She understood that what I was doing was not merely legal or logistical. She said she would be there at 7. I also called the non-emergency line of my local police department. This took 2 calls and 1 transfer before I reached a community liaison officer who listened to my situation and agreed to have a uniformed officer present as a courtesy, at my attorney's request. In case the conversation became difficult, he was professional and unfussy about it. He said it was more common than people might think. Closing was on a Friday. I was at Margaret's office by 9 in the morning with every document she had asked me to bring, and by 11:15, I had signed the last page, and the house I had lived in for 31 years no longer belonged to me. I sat in my car in the parking structure for about 10 minutes. I am not a man who cries easily. I didn't cry, but I sat there, and I thought about Patricia, and I thought about the afternoon we had signed the original mortgage documents in a different office in a different part of the city, and how she had gripped my hand tightly on the way to the car and said, "I cannot believe we own a house, Walter. I genuinely cannot believe it." And we had laughed, both of us laughing in the parking lot in the October sun, completely unable to contain it. I thought about all of that. Then I started the car and went back to the house to finish moving. My friends, the couple with the basement apartment, came with a truck that Saturday. We moved the things I had not yet put in storage. We were careful and methodical, and we were done by early afternoon. I left the rooms I had used the way they had always looked, or close to it, close enough that the day-to-day wouldn't reveal anything. I still had 12 days. I slept in my bedroom for those 12 days because the apartment wasn't fully set up, and because, honestly, I wanted those last nights in that house. I want to be fair about something, even now. My son was not a bad person. He was a weak one, in the specific way that decent people can become weak when they are too eager to please someone at the expense of everyone else. He had stopped calling me as much in the year before all of this. He had stopped asking about my health with the same specificity he once had. I had told myself this was normal, that adult children pulled back, that new marriages required realignment, but I had been lying to myself, because I had wanted the lie to be true. He didn't deserve what his wife had been planning. But he had not done anything to stop it, either. And the years I had spent building things had taught me that a structure that allows a fault to widen without repair is not an innocent bystander to the eventual collapse. Thanksgiving morning, I woke up at 6. I made coffee. I walked through the house one last time in the gray November light. I stood in the kitchen where Patricia had cooked every meal I had eaten with any real comfort. And I stood in the living room where I had read to my son when he was small, and I stood for a long moment in the doorway of the room that had been ours, mine and Patricia's, for 3 decades. I said what I needed to say in the silence. Then I picked up my bag, set my key on the kitchen counter, and closed the garage door behind me for the last time. I drove to my friend's house. I ate Thanksgiving dinner with them and their adult daughter and her husband, who had come from Seattle, and it was genuinely warm and genuinely good, and I was grateful for it in a way that felt clean. At 6:45, I drove to my former house. Margaret was already there. She had parked on the street and was waiting in her car, and she met me at the front door with her briefcase and an expression of focused calm that I had come to appreciate very much over the preceding months. The officer arrived 4 minutes later, a young man named Torres, maybe 30 years old, who shook my hand and positioned himself near the front hallway with the quiet competence of someone who had done this before. We didn't have to wait long. I heard my son's car in the driveway at 7:12. I heard them talking as they came up the front walk, his voice low and indistinct, her voice brighter, already narrating something about the evening they'd just had. I heard the key in the lock. The door opened. My daughter-in-law saw the officer first. Her voice stopped mid-sentence. My son saw Margaret at the dining room table. Then they both saw me. There is a particular quality to someone's face when their mental model of a situation collides with a reality that the model cannot accommodate. I watched this collision happen on both their faces in the span of about 4 seconds. My daughter-in-law's processing was faster. She had always been the sharper of the two. I will give her that. I watched her eyes go quickly from the officer to Margaret to me to the room, cataloging what had changed, what was different, what was missing. "Walter," my son said. His voice was careful. "Come sit down," I said. "There are some things that need to be said." They sat. My son sat across from me with the look of someone who has not yet decided how frightened to be. His wife sat beside him with very controlled stillness, the stillness of someone thinking hard about what they do and do not know. I nodded to Margaret. She explained it clearly and completely and without drama, the way a good attorney explains things as fact, not as accusation. The house had been sold and the transaction had closed 12 days prior. As the sole owner of record, I had had every right to do so. The proceeds of the sale were my property. The new owners were taking possession today, which is to say now, which is to say that my son and his wife would need to collect their belongings and vacate the premises this evening. She said the new owners had agreed to allow a 2-hour window as a courtesy. My daughter-in-law spoke first. Her voice was level, but something behind her eyes had fractured. "This is our home," she said. "No," Margaret said. "It was not. It has never been. We've been living here for 2 years. As guests," Margaret said. "At Walter's invitation. There was no lease, no tenancy agreement, and no legal relationship that conferred any rights of occupancy beyond Walter's ongoing consent. That consent has been withdrawn." My son turned to me. I had not stopped watching him since he sat down. He looked older than 36. He looked, in that moment, exactly like the 12-year-old boy who had sat at the kitchen table and stared at his hands while he confessed to breaking something. "Dad," he said. "Why?" "You know why," I said. He looked at his hands. "Tell him," I said quietly. My daughter-in-law put her hand on my son's arm. A managing gesture. The gesture of someone trying to change the subject with another person's body. "This isn't the time to—" "I think it is," I said. "I think this is exactly the time." I looked at my son, first Tuesday of March. You were in the kitchen. Your wife was explaining how the plan would work, how you would wait until I was convinced we were a family, how the house would be in your names by spring, how there were very nice facilities in Beaverton. I paused. She said I wouldn't fight it. Not really. My son's face had gone a particular gray-white. He turned to his wife slowly. She said nothing. "For once, I want you to understand something," I said to my son. And I meant this entirely. This was not performance. This was the thing I had most needed to say. I would have done anything for you. I did do anything for you, for 36 years. If you had come to me and said you wanted the house, I would have found a way to think about it. I would have listened. I would have talked to you the way people in a family talk to each other. I stopped. I started again. What I could not accept was the planning, the patience of it, waiting for me to feel safe so that I would not see it coming. I looked at him steadily. "That's not something that happened to me. That was something you both chose to do." My son put his face in his hands. He stayed that way for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were wet and his face was still gray, and he said, "I'm so sorry, Dad." I believed him. That was the complicated part. I believed that he meant it. "I know," I said. My daughter-in-law had recovered some composure. She was looking at Margaret. "Is there any legal basis on which we can—" "No," Margaret said. "There isn't. He should have given notice. 60 days. The standard residential landlord-tenant protections do not apply when there is no tenancy agreement and the relationship is familial guest occupancy without compensation. Walter owes you no notice period." Officer Torres shifted his weight slightly. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They packed in the 2 hours they were given. My son moved quietly and without complaint, carrying boxes and bags to their car, with the methodical blankness of someone operating on a part of the brain that hasn't fully processed what the other parts already know. His wife was efficient and tight-jawed, and did not look at me directly again for the remainder of the evening. Before my son got in the car, he stopped. He was standing at the edge of the driveway, in the November dark, holding his keys, and he said, "Where are you going to go, Dad?" "I've made arrangements," I said. He nodded slowly. He looked at the house. He had grown up in that house. I knew he was remembering it differently than I was in that moment. I could afford to acknowledge that. "I'm going to call you," he said. "When things are, I'm going to call you." "I'll answer," I said. He got in the car. I stood in the driveway until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Margaret came and stood beside me. She had her briefcase in one hand and her car keys in the other, and she looked at the November sky for a moment. "Are you all right?" she said. "I've been better," I said. "And I've been considerably worse." She nodded. "What happens now?" I told her about the apartment at my friend's house. I told her I had 6 months to figure out the longer term. I told her that Donna had already sent me 3 listings she thought were worth looking at. Smaller places, single story, easier to maintain, in good neighborhoods, within range of the same grocery stores and the same roads I had driven for 30 years. Margaret said that sounded like a plan. "It's a start," I said. The new owners arrived shortly after. A young couple, the woman visibly pregnant, both of them looking at the house with the particular mix of exhaustion and hope that I remembered from 31 years ago in a different parking lot, a different set of keys in hand. I introduced myself. I shook both their hands. I told them it was a good house, well-maintained, good bones, and that the neighborhood was quiet on weeknights and only reasonably loud on summer weekends when the Harmon family, 2 doors down, had their annual block party. The woman laughed. The man thanked me. I got in my car and I drove through Portland, in the dark and the rain, the way it rains in November here, steady, patient, the kind of rain that has no urgency, because it knows it has all winter. I want to be clear about what happened after, because this is the part that matters, and the part that I have thought about carefully since. My son called me 8 days later. He was staying with a friend from work. His wife had gone to her parents' house in Medford. They were, he said, in the process of figuring out what came next for their marriage. He said this without asking me what I thought of it, which I appreciated. He said he had been going over the months since they had moved in, and that there were things he had seen, things he had let go, that he was ashamed of. He said he had chosen the easier path more times than he could count, and that he understood, now, what that had cost. He did not ask me for anything. That was how I knew he meant it. I told him we would figure it out. I told him that I was his father, and that I was not going anywhere, and that there was a difference between forgiveness and forgetting, and that I was willing to work toward the first one at whatever pace the truth required. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That sounds like you, Dad." I said it probably was. As for the legal question, the one the audience in these situations always wants answered, because justice is not abstract. Justice is specific, and it has a shape. Margaret informed me that what my daughter-in-law had been planning, had it been carried out, could have constituted financial elder abuse under Oregon law. The planning she had articulated, the manipulation of an elderly person's estate through psychological pressure and strategic deception, was not something the courts looked at kindly. The conversation I had overheard, while not a recorded admission, was the beginning of a thread. If they had proceeded, if they had actually obtained signatures, filed documents, made transfers. They hadn't, because I hadn't given them the chance. Margaret said this was, legally, a clean outcome. No fraud had been completed. No charges would necessarily follow. She also said that she had advised my son, when he called her separately to ask a few questions of his own, that he should be aware of what his wife had articulated on that Tuesday evening in March, that he should understand, very clearly, what the plan had been and what his role in it, passive or otherwise, had been, that there are certain kinds of knowledge that a person cannot unknow, and should not. I agreed with that. I am writing this from the apartment at my friend's house, which has turned out to be considerably more comfortable than I expected. The ceiling is low, and the light comes from the wrong side in the morning, but there is a wood stove in the corner, and a small patio where I have been putting a bird feeder, and my friend's wife brings down dinner more often than the arrangement strictly requires, because she is that kind of person, and I have learned, finally, to accept kindness when it is offered without needing to calculate what I owe in return. I have put an offer on one of the listings Donna sent me. A single-story house, 3 bedrooms, a yard that is small enough to be manageable and large enough to be worth caring about. It is 7 minutes from where I used to live. The neighborhood is different but not unfamiliar. The kitchen has good light. I think Patricia would have liked the kitchen. I am 68 years old, and I want to say something clearly to anyone who is listening. There is a particular cruelty in assuming that age makes a person easier to deceive, that the accumulation of years amounts to a reduction in clarity, that someone who has built things and raised a child and buried a spouse and weathered every ordinary and extraordinary difficulty that a life of this length inevitably contains, that such a person is somehow softer, slower, less capable of seeing exactly what is happening and responding to it with precision. I spent 34 years as an engineer. I know what load-bearing structures look like. I know what it looks like when something has been compromised at the foundation. And I know, better than most, how to build something new from what remains after the old structure comes down. The bird feeder outside my window has had its first visitor. A Steller's jay, blue-black and declarative, perched there for about 45 seconds before something startled it away. I watched it go. I picked up my coffee cup, which had gone cold while I was writing. I don't mind cold coffee. Never have. There is a lot of winter left. That's all right. I have always been a person who does better work in the quiet months, when the distractions fall away, and what remains is only what is actually true. I have plenty of time to figure out what comes next.